Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, could I just get a couple of people to click on the raise hand button to make sure that you can hear me clearly and see the screen that says Future City Mentor Best Practices webinar. Great, thank you. Thank you all. Well, like I said, welcome to the Future City Mentor Best Practices and Advice webinar for 2019. We're very happy to have you here today. My name is Jake Williams, and I'm the program coordinator for the Future City competition. As the title of this webinar suggests, the purpose today is to provide best practices and advice from a couple of experts in the area of Future City mentorship. So today's program is for both people who are long-term mentors, who are looking for some strategies and advice from their peers, as well as those who are brand new to the Future City program or are just considering becoming involved for the first time. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The program we're on, the platform is GoToWebinar. If the sound quality isn't great, you can switch from your computer audio to the phone line. We have a teleconference line that you can dial into. The phone number is there. Just select phone instead of computer on your control panel, and then dial in that number and that access code, and you'll be able to listen through the phone. And on a landline is typically better than a cell phone. Also, the recording of this webinar will be posted on the resources section of futurecity.org in the next couple days. So if anyone is welcome to go back and review after that's up in a day or two. We'll also have a question and answer period for our panel at the end of the webinar. So just go ahead and type in any questions that you may have into the question box on the control panel throughout the webinar at any time, and then we'll pose them to our two panelists at the end. I wanted to mention Discover E, which is the organization that runs and organizes the Future City competition. In addition to Future City, Discover E has a lot of other programs and free resources for STEM mentors. If you're looking for classroom activities or tools and materials that you can use with students, be sure to check out the website, which is discovere.org. Our mission specifically mentions engineering because we started out as the National Engineers Week Foundation, but this certainly doesn't mean that this is just for engineers. There are definitely materials for architects and city planners and technologists and many, many others will find this beneficial as well. So everybody is welcome. Also wanted to give a quick shout out and thank you to our final sponsors, which are Bechtel, Bentley Systems, NCEES, the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying, and Shell. Their support makes the finals as well as webinars like this possible. So real quick, just for those who are not familiar, Future City has been around for about 28 years, and last year served over 45,000 students all around the globe. In the United States, there are 40 regions that run local competitions. We also have 3 international official programs, one in Canada, one in China, and one in the Middle East based out of Egypt. So I'm with Future City headquarters. We produce materials like the program Handbook. We support local regions who put on the competitions, and we host the finals competitions in February each year here in Washington, D.C. The regional programs, of which there are, like I said, about 40 in the United States, are run by mostly volunteers who work really hard to put on these amazing events. They recruit schools and judges and mentors. They organize and run the regional competitions, and they do local fundraising to make it all happen. So now moving into the question of mentors and how mentors are involved in the Future City program. There's no single one right, correct way to be a Future City mentor. So be sure to talk with your team's official educator and discuss and plan exactly how you'll be involved. We'll talk about some general strategies and some specifics from our 2 guests today, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's no one single correct way. Some mentors help with all 5 deliverables, others support more broadly or focus on just a couple deliverables with the students. Before we introduce our panelists, I'd like to run through just very quickly each of the deliverables. There are 5 total. So for folks who are new, you'll get an idea of what the Future City competition involves, and it's a little refresher for those who are returning. So there are 5 deliverables that the team works on and that the mentors support. The first is the project plan, which introduces the kids to basic project management concepts and helps them set their own roadmap for their future city experience. They'll outline their schedule, set their own goals, and review and adjust those accordingly throughout the 4 or 5 months that they're working on their future city. The virtual city is the deliverable that involves the software SimCity, where students learn about components of city design and management like zoning, budgeting, infrastructure, etc. It's not meant to be a version of their actual future city. It's simply used as an educational tool. One thing to note too is that this year will be the last that SimCity is a required part of the Future City competition. Next season, the virtual city deliverable will not be part of the program. The third deliverable is the essay, which is a 1,500-word essay that describes the team's city and dives into the challenge, which changes each year. This year's challenge or theme is for the team to choose a threat to their city's water supply and design a resilient system to maintain a reliable supply of clean drinking water. And so that theme will be involved in each of the components, each of the deliverables, but it's addressed most specifically in the city essay. The fourth deliverable is the city model, which is a 25-inch by 50-inch by 20-inch scale model made out of primarily recycled or reused materials, which depicts a section of the team's city. The entire model, as well as any props or costumes used in the presentation, must not exceed a $100 budget. This keeps the playing field level, and it also encourages kids to be creative and resourceful in their model design and construction. And the final deliverable is a presentation, which is done by the 3 official presenting students of the team to a panel of judges. Each presentation is followed by a question and answer period with the judges as well. So now, what makes a good mentor? Before introducing the panel, I just wanted to provide this quote. The delicate balance of mentoring someone is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves, which was said by director Steven Spielberg. And that very much aligns with the purpose of Future City. It's to connect mentors with teams, but the work is really that of the students themselves. The kids do the work themselves. The mentors kind of provide a window into the real world of STEM to assist and guide the students. So now it's my honor to introduce our 2 panelists. The first is Natalie Gandhi. Originally, she got involved in the Future City competition back in 2004 as a participant, along with her 2 friends and teammates, Allison Garda and Kara Hartz, who you can see in this picture here. She ended up winning the Pittsburgh regional competition and went on to win the national championship that year. The next year, she advised and mentored the team from her school. In college, Natalie studied civil engineering. She moved to California to do land development work, and there she got involved with the local Future City competition, first as a judge in 2013, and later as the Northern California Mentor Coordinator, where she reached out to other STEM professionals and brought them on board. Natalie is now taking a break from her work on Future City as she raises her 2 kids, aged 3.5 and 8 months old. She says she's hopeful that both of her kids will be able to be part of the competition in the future, and she looks forward to returning as a volunteer soon. She currently works in the field of sports field design. Natalie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's very awesome to be here.
Our next panelist is Ray Woodson, who is an engineer mentor who has been volunteering with the Academy for Science and Foreign Languages Future City program in Huntsville, Alabama since 2011. Ray is a retired aeronautical engineer with 40 years of experience. His past work includes Beech Aircraft, Boeing, Learjet, Flight Safety International, Gulfstream, Cessna, Raytheon Aircraft, Eclipse Aviation, and Diamond Jet in Canada. He also taught for 2 years at a technical college, in addition to his work managing teams for aerodynamic design and analysis, weight engineering, and flight test programs. His mentoring experience started when he hired college interns, and he went on to mentor students in high school and college projects in New Mexico, Kansas, and Alabama. On top of his current mentor role with the Future City competition, Ray is also a mentor for ASFL's Best Robotics, which he has done for the past 10 years. Ray, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's get right into it. Natalie, the first question is for you, and it is, how is Future City similar and or different from other STEM competitions and programs?
I think so. One of the main things that I found as a participant of Future Cities is a time investment that's involved in Future Cities. There are other competitions that happen and they tend to be a little bit shorter from the startup to the competition. And Future Cities is, in my opinion, I think it's a good thing that it's a long-term competition, because you have to have the foresight of when you start to think about the engineering principles, and then it continues for almost 3/4 of your the year, and then it just can it brings in a lot of different engineering disciplines that you don't tend to see, like city planning, urban development, and others like that.
Excellent. Yeah, it's definitely not the kind of project where you study it briefly at school and then you take a test and then it's done in a week. It's a long-term project-based program where you really, like you said, you get to dive deep into a number of different types of engineering and STEM fields. Ray, same question for you. How does Future City similar and how is it different from other STEM programs and specifically competitions?
Well, for me, the simplest way of outlining the similarities is the encouragement of a methodical thought process. We call it engineering process, but encouraging that thought process, to me, should be the hallmark of most STEM programs. And also it engages the students in research and fabrication. That's something they might not see in some of the other programs. But in a lot of them they do. The differences I see in or did you ask that yet?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. The differences I see between Future City and a lot of the others I've been involved in are in the clear delineation of what's required. Future City is probably the best defined program I've worked on. The deliverables are clearly defined. The criteria, the rubrics are clearly defined. The constraints, money, time, etc., are clearly defined. And so a lot of the programs are open-ended, whereas Future City boxes it up and says, here's what you have to work with and here's where you can go. And I think that's a good thing.
Great, excellent. Next, we've gone to what makes a great Future City mentor. Natalie, when you were a mentor coordinator in Northern California, what did you look for in a mentor? What makes a great Future City mentor?
The main thing that we looked for in a prospective mentor is someone who's just really excited about the program. The mentors that we saw that stuck with, maybe not stuck with it, but had more involvement were, I apologize, my daughter just woke up. They were excited about working with the kids. They were excited about not only imparting their knowledge, but also learning from the kids. So they understood that the mentorship was beneficial to the students and the competition and their city, but they also were willing to learn something in the process.
Excellent, great. Ray, we'll get into specifics with the handbook and deliverables and the rubrics a little bit later in the webinar, but just generally, could you tell us a little bit about when you start working with a new team, what's the first thing that you do each season?
When I start working with a new team, the first thing I do is try to get a copy of the handbook in their hands. And then the next thing I do is have them read that thing, you know, open it up and understand what the topic for the year is. The next thing I do is have them look at the deliverables. When are they due? Get a calendar out and plant those babies on there. And from then on, I can talk about each of the deliverables independently or as an aggregate. I can talk about the project plan, which they've already begun when they put these deliverables on the schedule. And that's how I start out. I start, I don't know, I guess the project plan for me is number one after they open the book. And then, you know, review the schedules. That's the thing that I get. That's how I start out.
Great. Natalie, to you, what are the top priorities when it comes to Future City? So in other words, what makes a team successful in your eyes?
So firstly, what makes any team successful, I think, is the bond that the team has. So because kind of what I mentioned earlier in that Future Cities is a very interesting and awesome competition because it takes so long. That's one of the benefits, because it can make a really great team, because you spend that time together. You spend in our case, it was not a class, and I know some places have Future Cities as a class. So spending those late nights coming up with your city, coming up with ideas, writing the essay, which sometimes seems like it is the hardest part just because it's more words and less interesting than actually building the city. But spending those late nights, spending the time together, really bonding. And when you go to the competition, you can see the students that have created this relationship with each other, that they depend on each other. They understand that if one person doesn't know the information, that one of the other people will. And you can tell that as a judge, as a mentor, even probably as a teacher, which groups are cohesive in the way they think, the way they've built the city, that they've worked together and really thrived in that bond.
Excellent. And so Ray, in your situation as a team mentor, if that isn't the case, if a team is kind of struggling with connecting or working well together as a team, do you have any strategies that you implement to kind of team building, increase that process or make them more comfortable together, or work more better together as a team?
Well, that draws on some experience from being an engineering manager. You know, we don't always get along. But the one thing I try to do is identify the strengths of each individual, because there's a lot of facets of Future City. For instance, if somebody's good at the computer and loves to play video games, then we focus them on the virtual city. And I heard you say we're going to do away with that?
Yes, this will be the last year for SimCity.
Okay, well, that aside, and then there are some that are good writers. There are some that are good thinkers, but may not be able to put it down in writing. And so what we do is we start off and by the time we get through, you know, some people working on SimCity, we've got some others off in the corner working on formulating the project plan. And while they're working on that, I try to pique their interest in, once they've decided on their solution to the topic of the year, pique their interest in building an essay, research and building an essay. Some people don't research well, others do. So what I try to do is identify who those are, spread the tasks out, and watch it blossom. It generally does.
Great, excellent. Natalie, many teams are looking to get paired with a mentor and also vice versa, but they may not be near one physically. What options would you recommend for a mentor to get involved, even if they cannot be with the team in person or can't be with them very often?
Oh, that's a great question, because we had to actually solve that problem when, oh gosh, I don't remember what year it was, but recently we had to solve that problem because we had a lot of teams in the outskirts of the Northern California area where there weren't mentors as much, but then closer to Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, there were mentors that wanted to participate. So we had a mismatch of locations. So we came up with a solution to have virtual mentorship. So we created a Google group that that teams could post questions, and general questions about the competition, about their city specifically, or about how to understand a concept. And then we had these mentors, and I was one of them as well, just to make sure that at least one person was responding at a given time, because I know some of the questions were time imperative. You could have these mentors responding, giving their opinions, and having a hive mind of mentors assisting all of these other teams that needed the assistance. But if one mentor is looking for one team that they can't get to the location, because sometimes the team meetings happen during the workday and mentors can't necessarily leave their job. Skyping, FaceTiming, emailing, all of these things that when we live in this digital age can be used to our benefit. You can video chat. The mentor can take 30 minutes out of their day, or however long they want to be able to give, and talk with the students that way.
Excellent. So let's get into some more specifics of the competition. Ray, you brought up the handbook before. How do you approach the handbook each year? You mentioned that you share it with the students. What other kind of strategies do you have for using it as a resource?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I were going to be a teacher of STEM, I'd use the Future City Handbook because of the way it's put together. From start to finish, it opens up the issue of the year, and then starts asking questions and all that. But what I do is I try to copy and distribute the key deliverable pages out of the handbook. And for myself, what I do is I tab each deliverable section, and then right behind it in a different color, I tab each rubric section, and then I make my handbook available for anybody to look at, and they can quickly go into any deliverable and read what the handbook says about that, and then turn the page and read what are going to be the things that I have to do to score well enough on this competition. So I have them read the rubrics right away. I know that I harp on that a lot, but that's one of the things that I do have them read right away, so that they get some notion that, hey, the judgment day is coming. And then as they get on a deliverable, have them review it again And so we use the handbook when they're developing an essay, for instance, as an example, lying right beside them as they're on the word processor, and we have a projector so they can all be involved in it. But what we do is we have the rubric laying there, and when they're working, you say, ask them to ask themselves, have I complied with this thing? Have I done it well enough to get 3 points? And so on. So that's we consume the handbook. We do. I can't say anything better about the handbook than it is the Bible of how to get through this.
Excellent. Natalie, could you talk a little bit about the engineering design process and how it fits into the Future City program? How should a mentor utilize this with his or her team?
So a little background about how I use the way that we use the design process in my work is that you take a look at the problem statement as to what your client wants, which in this case is the judge in the competition. Kind of building exactly on what Ray had said is look at the handbook and see where you're going to be graded firstly. Okay, so you know where they're going to be graded. Now let's do a rough outline, like a schematic design. Kind of what do we want to achieve in this? How do we kind of want to go about it? And get some initial ideas. Then as you go through and start fleshing out your initial ideas, you may have to change some of them because they may be too lofty of a thought process to answer the essay, for example. Maybe you thought it was a great initial idea, but it won't be fleshed out in the however many words is required. So then you have to go back to the drawing board on that. And each step of the process, considering will I get the proper points for this that we're aiming for? Will we be able to back this up when we have the presentation? Because the judges will ask questions about their essays and how they maybe how they have done it in their city. And then when you finally go into what our deliverables are, construction documents, or how do we actually construct this? So how did the teams go and how do we show this to the judges in a way that we, for the last, 9 months or 7 months, however long from when they started, that they've started thinking about, they've lived and breathed this thought. How do we show it to the judges in a way that we know it? And how do you build the city to be proud of? And each step of the process of redesigning and rethinking about it, making sure to keep in mind everything that they're going to be graded on. Have we thought about everything? What questions have we answered already? How can we answer these in a way that proves that we know exactly what we're talking about? And just making sure to be thoughtful and mindful about everything that you are designing and everything that you are answering.
Excellent. So scheduling is very important, and the project plan can be a great tool for you to work with this concept with your team. Ray, how do you recommend using and working with the project plan with one's team? You talked about how that's one of the first things that you work with your team with. What do you actually do with them in regards to the project plan?
Well, I emphasize with them at the very beginning that they need to understand that there are dates that are important. And then, of course, I fold that into the fact that, yeah, we're going to talk about this. We're going to call it a project plan. And then we begin to, we start project plan real early, right next door, right side by side with SimCity. Even though it's a later deliverable, it's very important to the team to understand. I think Natalie alluded to many of these things before, but to understand that, a deliverable doesn't just happen. There has to be planning coming along before it. and each one folds into the next one. So I start with a project plan and choose how they want to keep track of all the deliverables and all that's required. And then I put it into their weekly tasking to review the schedules. So the project plan sits there on top of everything that they do. And they review their schedules periodically. You know, it may not be every week, it may be every other week, but at any rate, and then see if they need to refocus some of their energies and find out what needs to change at any given time. Also, they can find out from that project plan what things lead to other things. In other words, how the deliverables cross-pollinate. And so I don't know. That was probably a long way around the bush, but that's our starting point, the project plan.
Excellent. Very good. And also, just as a reminder, like Ray said, you know, it's very good to think about the project plan as not something that you do, you know, 4 times throughout the process, but something that you and your team are continuously returning to and updating and thinking about. And don't let it be just something that you every now and then check in with, but it can be very useful and beneficial when it's something that's a regular part of the planning for them.
Oh, actually, can I jump in? Can I jump in on that quick?
Definitely.
I really love what Ray does, is that he introduces the plan first, because that's something that we as engineers do, is that you look at the plan, you look at everything that is going to be happening, figuring out how long it's going to take. And that's another important thing about the mentors. Yes, we want to help them do well in this competition and everything, but we're also tasked with showing them how the STEM field works. And if we can use the verbiage that is used in the field, use the methods that we use, like getting the project plan at the very beginning of a project and continually re-looking at it to see, do we need to change anything? Do we need to tweak anything? That's an important part of the mentor, is mentoring them for what could be their future career.
Great point. Excellent point. Yeah, one thing that we...
Natalie reminded me of something. Now, 2 years ago, I introduced our team to a Gantt chart. Now, a lot of the guys listening right now know exactly what I'm talking about. They've been through it in their project planning and all that. And these kids looked at that thing, and at first they were overwhelmed. But I'll tell you what, when it got all said and done, they knew what they were doing any day of the week. And they could tell when time was of the essence. And so I agree, project plan the whole way.
Excellent. Great. And also, just as a reminder, things like the team schedule, you know, those can be done in a creative way. It doesn't have to be just purely written out data right there. It can be in a way that is useful and creative and fun for the team as well. So moving on, we've talked quite a bit, both Natalie and Ray have mentioned the value of the rubrics. So just as a reminder, those are all in the program handbook itself, but you can also download them separately as PDFs. They can be printed out or sent to the team. Those are in the resources section of the website. If you filter search for rules and rubrics, you can get the updated ones each year for that. And we've talked a little bit about this, but Ray, do you want to, do you have anything else to add about your approach for sharing the rubric with your students? The rubrics can be something that a lot of middle school students find intimidating at first. Do you have any ways that you make it more accessible to them or less frightening, and show them how it can be a tool for them as they're actually working on the project, not just as something for counting points?
Yeah, well, I introduced them very early on, and many of them at this point in their school careers are familiar with some form of rubrics at any rate, you know, depending on what classes they've taken. So but these get to be a little more elaborate than the ones they're used to. And so when I present them, I say, well, you know, the difference between doing something poorly or doing something fantastic is that line, whatever that line is. And it spells out the criteria for achieving which piece of it. Now, they find it useful. Most of them have found the rubric quite useful and not intimidating at all. And I think it's a matter of giving them the comfort of knowing that they can read it, they can interpret it, and they can see for themselves what's required of them to produce whatever the deliverable is that will glean for them the highest value.
Great.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, excellent.
Sometimes I don't know.
That's great. Natalie, what options are there for STEM professionals who are interested in mentoring but can't make the time commitment necessarily to be a full official team member?
I've mentioned this before, but a Google group is interesting because you can participate as much as you want. You can, offer, answer to 3 questions the entire year and have a good introduction to that. The other way is to just, if they want to reach out to the school that's close to them and say, I don't know how much time I can give, but I could be like a preliminary judge for the team and say, okay, here's the rubric, here's what we have. Can you grade this essay that you've never seen before? Can you take a look at this? And the mentor position can look very different to different people. They could be like a pretend judge. A lot of times the presenters also want to practice in front of people, in front of professionals. And if they want to, say, I can give 30 minutes once and I don't want to make the full year commitment. Well, maybe that's something that the team wants to do. Or they can offer their services over email and say, can you just email me the questions that you have and I'll get back to you within a couple of days.
Great.
Wow, I like that.
Yes, excellent. Ray, you've been working with the same educator for a number of years. Whether or not a mentor works with the same school or group or teacher year after year, what kinds of materials do you save and how do you use them from year to year with new teams of new kids?
What we've done, and the fact that I have, mega terabytes of clouds and disks and everything else, I'm an engineer. I collect trash, so I have everything we've ever done for the past 9 years now, 8 years plus this year, and I save copies of all the deliverables. And so if they really get stuck in a hard spot and they want to know about, what in the world do you do to do this? And it comes up mostly in the essay and the presentation. But anyhow, we save those. Now, we'll go back and we'll review. We won't plagiarize or take anything, but we'll say, here's what worked before, and that's the way I present this. That's the way I presented it in China. Here's what worked before, and let them read those things and get an idea of what kind of worked before. Now, if I had never worked with a group, which turns out back when I first started, I hadn't, I found the website quite useful because there are also each of those things. There you go. That's the page. And you can go back and you can find the essays from previous years. You can find, you can even see videos of the presentations from previous years. And those are invaluable. Those things, I went back and looked at Michigan's 2 or 3 times, because St. John's has been a successful school. And so I went back and I reviewed their stuff to see what in the world they did. So And I pass that on to the students. So we review the past deliverables. The Future City website, again, there's that page right there is an excellent page. And another one, I don't know, Natalie, you know, you were a mentor coordinator, and this would be a question I would have for you, because we don't have such an animal here in our Alabama region. And that intrigues me, that there would be someone that could help us to help newcomers. And I would say for myself, anything I have is fair game. If a new mentor came in, I would embrace the possibility of sharing anything I had with them. So that's a resource that, you know, for what it's worth, all I can say is this is what's worked for us. And so those are the kind of resources I save, I pursue looking on the website, and I would gladly and freely distribute anything I have to somebody else.
Excellent. Thanks, Ray. We have a question from Megan. She asks, are the winning virtual city presentations on the website? And the answer to that is they are not the individual ones from teams. On the gallery section, you can see the top 5 essays and presentations from the top 5 finalists. But there are example virtual city slideshows that you can view in the resources section, resources and filter search for SimCity. And you can see an example of what the virtual city presentation, the PowerPoint, looks like, with some examples and some annotated details to help a team, especially if they're brand new. Natalie, in what ways did participating in Future City as a student prepare you for your professional career?
I think that's an interesting question, in that what I think the first thing that comes to mind is being okay with not knowing something and learning how to figure that question out. So when you had to go through the presentation, and someone asks you a question that you may not know, you are able to connect the dots as to what you do know about your city, and then kind of hypothesize how your city would answer the question. And it got me used to the design process. It got me used to writing in a very specific manner, because scientific and engineering writing are very different than creative writing, which you tend to do more in English classes. And the essay that's required for Future Cities is a very different type of writing. And it got me used to working on a computer with a new tool, because right now you have, in a lot of engineering fields, you have different tools that you've never seen in your college, in your coursework or anything, and you have to learn how to do it. So you have to learn how to do SimCity. That's why I think it's such a cool competition, is all these little pieces and big pieces teach you something that is important if you're going to go in this field, or if you're going to go into something that's even sort of related to it. Presenting in front of a bunch of people who are engineers, and you're an 8th grader and you're supposed to know your stuff, that's really intimidating. But so is like talking with the CEO of your company to pitch him an idea, or he asks you to do a project and you have to show it to him and stand by it. That's also intimidating, and you learn it in 8th grade. All these little things are invaluable to what you can learn.
Excellent, great. So now is the time for any questions and answers. So if anyone in the audience, any attendees have any questions, just type them into the question box now, and we'll direct them to the panel. One thing, Natalie mentioned earlier about using mentors using professional language, and I just wanted to point out that I had just heard from an educator who said that one of the things that her students appreciated most about their interaction with their mentor was the way that he treated them like adults, like peers. So it's kind of finding that balance of not using overly complicated technical language, but treating them like an adult, like a coworker, kind of showing them what it's like to work with adults, and like you said, if you were going to be giving a presentation to the CEO or to colleagues, that's something that is very invaluable in the experience that we've heard from a lot of participants. We have one question who asks, what advice would you give to a new mentor who's interested in Future City but doesn't have much experience working with middle school students? Either Natalie or Ray, you have an answer to that?
Sure, I can. Well, go ahead, Natalie.
Okay. I can go first, then you can go next, because I'm sure we will say something. I mean, middle schoolers are just people too. Like they're learning how to go through this competition and figure things out. Like I know middle school is an age that people can be terrified to work with because they remember when they were middle school, like it's a tough time in life. But in general, like if exactly what you said, Jake, like if you each treat each other like colleagues, because you basically you're working on the same project together, no matter how old you are and how young you are. I mean, their mentor could be 85 years old and these kids are in 8th grade, like they're working on the same project. You have different knowledge, but you're going to come together to have the same goal in mind. So it's just like working in your company with someone who's older or younger than you. You put aside anything that you have, any preconceived notions about that person, to get something done and to do it well.
Excellent. Jake, were you going to use that Maya Angelou quote at any time?
I didn't have that here, so feel free to go ahead. And
I would like to say that one, and it ties in with what Natalie says, and for me expands it further. This is from a series of quotes for mentors that I found a couple years ago. Well, actually, it was when I was getting ready for the China trip, but it says, in order to be a mentor and an effective one, one must care. One must care. You must care. You don't have to have a knowledge of the square miles of Idaho. You don't need to know what is the chemical makeup of chemistry or of blood or water. Know what you know and care about the person. Care about what you know and care about the person you're sharing it with. And that was a quote from Maya Angelou. And I loved it. I loved it mostly because I like kids anyhow. I've been working with them for years, and I've been when I was an engineering manager, I loved working with interns that would come in for the summer, for a semester or whatever. And then taking that down to the middle school, I don't find a lot of difference between middle schoolers and college students in a lot of regards. Their minds are open, they're hungry, and I don't tell them how to do something. I just try to help them see how they might want to do it. So and certainly one of the things that Natalie alluded to, never condescending.
excellent. Yes, very, very good advice. We have one last question. He asked, said, we've talked about Future City specific resources, but are there other resources that you use as a mentor? Maybe things like through your own work, your own professional resources that you ever share with a team? Do you want to start, Ray, and then we'll end with Natalie?
Well, I do, and I try to, because I'm old, Jake, you know that. So, you know, call it experience or call it age, I don't know. But for instance, I'm an old backpacker, and I was trying to explain water filtration. Well, I carried with me this little thing that's no bigger than a drinking glass that I filtered water out of streams and drank it. And so I share that with the kids, and I take a little bit of, you know, temper paint or something and smear it in with the water, make it dark, and then filter it. Also, what I try to do is if I know anybody, and I have a lot of contacts, if I know anybody who's experienced in a certain area, try to get them to come out and spend a few minutes with the kids. We did that with a lady who works in handicap or buildings. When we were doing the one a couple years ago about aging,
Age friendly.
age friendly. We had the director of the waterworks in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that happened to be the grandfather of one of our children in the competition this year, and we spent a half an hour on a telecon with him. So people are good resources, and I draw on that. So now I could probably think of 100 other things, but we don't have enough time.
Natalie, did you have anything to add for non-Future City specific resources that either you or other mentors you've worked with have kind of brought into to work with their teams with?
I wanted to back what Ray's saying is that the people that you would know. I mean, if you think about it, the mentor may be the first engineer that some of these kids will know. So you are an engineer in their mind, and you are the engineer, and your face is the engineer. But what you can do, you have colleagues, you know other people, you can introduce them to other people or other ideas of people that where you may need some help. The other thing is when a lot of times teams may get stuck on how to solve a problem. And like I'm a member of the American Society for Civil Engineers, and they have a monthly magazine, or online or hard copy, printed copy. And if a lot of times those are cutting edge ideas that are happening, and to maybe bring that in and jumpstart their creativity is one way to do it.
Excellent. Yeah, those are great because as mentors, you are kind of involved in worlds or have access to things that aren't necessarily on the radar of the educator. So being able to bring in those things like professional publications and those kind of things that you're thinking about that other people might not be thinking about are really great. That's kind of the whole purpose of the mentor, of having the mentor. So that's excellent. We have one last question. Comes from Mary. She asks, how do you have the kids begin their sketches and plans for the model?
Well, I can speak to that. When we start out with a model, I very specifically begin the talk of a model with three things: scale, or, you know, how big a house do you want to put on this 22 by 46 piece of plywood? Obviously, it can't be a full-size house, and if you make it 1 inch equals a bazillion feet, then, you know, 27 grains of salt covers the territory. So a scale is the first thing I start out with when we're talking about a model. The next thing I talk to them about is to recall, and I guess we'll have to change that next year, recall from their SimCity the business of zoning. And so think about where, if you've got this certain amount of real estate in a board that you're going to put stuff on, try to get all 3 zones incorporated and have it be a logical arrangement. Other than that, we turn them loose and let them go, and then we have to rein them in occasionally. But for the most part, if they think scale and they think zoning, then let their imaginations run wild.
Excellent. Anything to add, Natalie?
I think, I mean, Ray basically said everything. One thing I wanted to say, like regarding scale and everything, I think a way to ask it at the beginning is, what is important in your city to you? Are there flying cars that you want to show? Are there, like, so how tall do you want to make it? Is it important that there's a river involved, or like what things do you want to showcase and talk about? And then it can lead into some of these other questions as to what buildings do you show, how much detail do you want to show, things like that.
Excellent.
Great. Wonderful. Well, that is pretty close to time for us. If you have not already, please make sure you register as a mentor on the website. You do that by going to the register section at the top of the homepage and select mentor. You can also use this direct URL. When you sign up as a register officially, then you'll be able to see things like deliverable due dates, and you'll also have access when you're paired with the educator's account to upload deliverables if needed, and you'll have access to those scoring details when they come out, which is really useful. Also, at the end of this webinar, there'll be a very short survey that will pop up asking for feedback about what you thought and any recommendations or comments for the future. We do read all those recommendations and make changes for next year. So please take the time. It's just like 4 questions to give us feedback on your experience today. I want to give a very big thank you to Natalie and Ray for being fantastic mentor panelists for our first ever Mentor Best Practices webinar. Thank you very much for your time, and thank all of you who attended. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to me at info@futurecity.org. And have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jake.
Bye.